When I was in my bachelor studies here in the Prince Claus Conservatorium in Groningen, a subject of studying historical keyboard instruments was integrated into the curriculum, and all pianists had to start with a fortepiano, since this was the instrument that was closer to the modern piano. Fortepianos are early pianos. Some people prefer the term period or early pianos because this is what fortepianos are. They have many differences with the modern pianos, but this is something we will see later on. Bartolomeo Cristofori in 1700 invented an instrument which he called gravicembalo col piano e forte, so a harpsichord that can produce piano and forte, soft and loud. The fascinating thing for me about fortepianos is that they are the instruments that Mozart, Haydn and many other composers had at their disposal. Playing them, you're getting closer to what these composers heard and what their music is about. This instrument represents the music of a very specific time. But there is not just one type of fortepiano. During the 18th and 19th centuries, there were many different piano makers, and all the composers who lived at those times used different instruments for their compositions. The period of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Viennese classical era, was the time which established the fortepiano as the main keyboard instrument. The rapid change of the instruments which followed, similar to the constant update of technology today, led us to the Romantic era and finally to the 20th century with all its different music styles, establishing in a way the modern piano as we know it today. This is a replica of an Anton Walter fortepiano from around 1800, made by Paul and Theo Cobalt in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. Taking a first look at both instruments here, we can see that the fortepiano is less wide than the modern piano, which is a Steinway Model D, a concert grand. It has a much narrower case, it has only 5 octaves, and there are no pedals, or at least not where we are used to see them. Actually, there are 2 knee levers exactly under the keyboard. The one is the damper lever, and the other one is the moderator. The moderator is a strip of felt that is placed between the hammers and the strings. The keyboard has a very light touch, and if we could see closer, the keys move down half the depth compared to a modern Steinway. The tone has a very fast decay here, and this is maybe one of the most important differences which can affect our interpretation in regard to phrasing or in general. Now let's hear it on the Steinway. Another very important difference, which is also visible, is that the fortepiano has parallel strings, while the modern piano has crossed ones. That means that here on the modern piano we get more resonance, because the bass strings are overlapping the tenor strings and somehow blending with the rest of the registers. We have more rich harmonies, while on the fortepiano we get a more articulated and vivid sound. Going back to the pedals, one very good musical example to show how different the effect of using the pedal is in these two different instruments is the very famous Quasi una Fantasia by Beethoven, known as the Moonlight Sonata. The instruction of Beethoven in the beginning of the piece, si deve suonare tutto questo pezzo delicatissimamente e senza sordino, which means that the whole piece must be played as delicate as possible and without dampers. Is basically indicating that we should play very softly while keeping the sustain pedal down during the whole movement. But how could we keep the sustain pedal on the modern piano while having all this extra sonority of harmonies? As you may have noticed, though, I didn't do that. Instead, I kept changing my sustain pedal, but I did keep the left pedal down in order to have a softer sound. Now let's see how this will sound on the fortepiano. We can already hear that the constant use of the damper lever in the fortepiano is not disturbing us with extra resonance, and furthermore, the pianissimo here is much more effective. The moderator creates a whole different atmosphere, which in my opinion supports Beethoven's precise direction to play as softly and delicately as possible. On the fortepiano, the use of the moderator can become a tool, an expressive tool that can have a huge impact on the character of the piece. This cannot happen to the modern piano because simply the mechanism of the una corda pedal works in a completely different way and can have a different result. So, how can we manage this on the modern piano? Except keeping the left pedal down in order to have as soft as possible sound, I think that by making late changes on the right pedal, we could perhaps achieve a balanced blend of harmonies that could support the mysterious atmosphere that Beethoven wants, and that would also not disturb our ears with extra resonance. This way we are more faithful to the composer, but above all, more faithful to the musical idea. Another example to give us a good idea of how fast the tone dies away here in the fortepiano is Mozart's Fantasia in C minor. As we see in the score, Mozart writes forte and then immediately piano. This can be very easily done here exactly because of the fast decay of tone, which causes a natural connection between these two notes. So diminuendo here is a very easy task. Let's try that on the Steinway. As you may notice, the sound here is much stronger and lasts longer. So the forte and immediate piano effect is actually easy to achieve here. But the effect of a natural diminuendo showing a fast, gradual dying of the forte sound to a softer one, it's very difficult, if not impossible. Assuming that this instrument was the only one that Mozart had in mind when composing this piece of music, we are already getting a hint of what is important for interpreting it. But what would be a practical solution for the modern piano? A lot of modern performers are taking a very slow tempo, which gives the time to prolong the chord and make a diminuendo on the second beat. But I do not personally prefer that, because I think it's very important to keep the adagio character and not turn it into lento. The way Mozart writes these first bars makes also clear to me that the attack of the first octave is very important for the character of the piece. So I wouldn't play it softer in order to have a faster decay of tone and imitate the natural connection with the next chord, like it's happening on the fortepiano, since that wouldn't be convincing on this instrument. Choosing a tempo similar to what I would have on the fortepiano and changing the pedal slowly between the first and second beat, focusing on the connection between the two octaves, could perhaps offer a solution for this musical problem. The piano, as we know it today, is the product of different artistic needs, and what we discuss now might look as a small detail, yet is quite important for the preservation of the style and what this music stands for. Rhetorical elements have always been reflected in the music of all times. Rhetoric aspects are present not only in the music of Mozart, Haydn or Beethoven, who are the most important composers of the classical era, but also in the music of Schubert, Chopin or Brahms, but in a different way. Here in front of me I have the variations in F minor by Haydn. I chose to talk about this piece of music because it contains a lot of these elements, and of course it's a piece of music I really like to play. It's full of expression markings, but as we will see, there are things that they're not written in the score, and they might give us a very good idea of how to interpret it. Modern performers would most likely have a different approach. They would be a little bit more generous with the pedal. The instrument invites this kind of approach, but if we use the pedal sparingly and try to bring details of the text to light, then we will be more able to hear the original intentions of the composer. Back to the beginning, we see the short articulation Haydn wrote for the middle voice, and I think it's very crucial to decide how to play this. A slight tension on the first beat of each slur and a diminuendo of the second will give a better pulse and help the melody which comes right after to be a bit more flexible. But let's listen to the bass and tenor voices. The slurs on the tenor voice are being continued until bar 4, where we come across to a different articulation. There is no slur, and it sounds and it looks like a syncopation. It is clear that Haydn wanted to indicate something different, so I think it's good to emphasize this effect in our playing. We could take a different timing, and we could slightly emphasize on the second note. Going very quick on the first variation, we see that Haydn wrote forzato under the notes, which on one hand should be considered as an accent, but also as a moment to lengthen the note. The effect here, once more, is like a syncopation. On the bass and tenor voices, we have the same slurring, and it's so important, once again, to slightly lengthen the first note of each slur in order to give space to our syncopated melodic line. Going back to the beginning, looking at the harmonic progressions, especially when we reach the point of the repeated notes, it's interesting to notice how the building up of the harmony helps to conduct the line and understand what is important to stress. So, analyzing the chord progressions of a piece could help us understand its meanings and how we could interpret it. After reaching bar 4, we have 2 bars that harmonically and melodically they're leading us to bar 6, where we arrive at a double dissonance. Dissonances have energy, and it is clear to me that they need to be stressed. So then the consonance that follows is the moment where we have to release this energy. Moving a bit further, we can see another example of chord progressions. Dominant 7th as a chord is very strong, and it's always attracted, it's always leading us to the tonic. The tonic is relatively less important, so it's stressed a bit less. If we play this without the embellishments, it becomes a bit more obvious. Some bars after, we have a good example of the short and long interpretation. Very often in this music we're talking about heavy or light execution, short and long, fast and slow, because it's the contrast that makes the different meanings understood and clear. Haydn is already precise in that he wants the second time of this rhythmical pattern to be shorter. That's why he puts pauses in between the notes on bar 21 and wedges on the left hand in order to have a different direction. So short and long, heavy, light. We can see very precise slurring and many articulation marks, which basically are the equivalents of punctuation marks in normal speech. When I'm talking to an audience, I'm using all kinds of punctuation like commas, full stops, brackets, exclamation marks, etc., just in order to make myself understood and my speech meaningful. When I lower my voice, it can mean that I'm about to finish my sentence. When I'm emphasizing a word, I put more tension on it by exaggerating the whole word or just one syllable. This way it's more possible for you to understand and follow what is important to me, compared to a monotonic voice that would make the whole sentence flat and therefore meaningless. Nevertheless, music is art, and in all kinds of art, exaggeration is very important. So sometimes, in order hidden meanings and messages are brought to light, the artist has to exaggerate important elements in his or her performance in order to make things clear for the audience. The same thing counts for performing a piece of music, and even more for a piece of music of that period. Rhetorical elements are a signature of this style, and this is what a performer of today could consider to bring out in his or her interpretation. Now, in front of me, I have the first of the 6 Moments musicaux by Schubert, so let's have a look at that. Schubert is a composer of the early Romantic period. Like other composers, he's also very precise with articulation and other expressive markings, and the way he's using them in his compositions creates a very elegant and sophisticated style. This instrument, once more, is offering a very gestural approach. The quick decay of tone gives me the flexibility to show the direction of the melody, which clearly goes to the second bar, where we have a tensed moment and then a diminuendo. This concept, of course, could be realized on the modern piano as well, minding that here we will have a longer lasting sound. But the concept should still be the same. So as with Haydn variations, the phrasing here is again about light and heavy execution, lengthening or shortening the notes. Playing a bit further, we are getting more evidence for that. Here, I'm also considering the accents as longer moments, stressing points. So again, long and short, important and less important. Rhetorical elements can be found in all kinds of music styles. However, moving away from the classical period, we can see that the connection between rhetoric and music is conceived in a different way by the composers already, and also by performers as well. Early rhetorical elements are nevertheless still echoing in the music of the late Romantic era and of course in the music of the early 20th century. Looking at the Capriccio No. 1 of the Klavierstücke Opus 76 by Brahms, a bit after the introduction and more specifically in bars 20 to 26, we see that he writes double slurs and many dynamic markings. In bar 20 we arrive at a forte, which seems to me more like a moment of stress, so lengthening the note. A high point in the melody with a release of energy right after. The second time we see the forte in bar 22, I think it should be a little bit more emphasized, because the repetition of notes, phrases, motives in this music makes it more conclusive and more rhetorical. Also, he's writing the melody by using shorter slurs the second time. He doesn't include them in bar 21. He has just one slur which shows the grouping of the notes. But in bar 23, he does include short slurs. The melody now is descending in pairs, so it's shorter, and it seems a bit more conclusive and rhetorical. Then, in bars 24 to 25, we have the final conclusion of this bigger phrase. In bar 25, he chooses another way to indicate stress by writing the dynamic markings above it. One last example from the same piece, a bit before the end, in bars 64 to 70, we can see the pedaling that Brahms wrote. We have a big line on the right hand and a shorter one on the left hand. He clearly doesn't want the bass to resonate with the other notes, and of course he wants to emphasize the descending melody, which naturally invites a diminuendo. If we don't do this and have a richer pedal, then the result is definitely not the same, because we cannot listen clearly to what happens in the left hand and to what Brahms indicated so precisely. Modern performers, including myself of course, are used to creating big lines generally, either by keeping the sustained pedal down all the time or by playing legatissimo, since this is what a modern instrument naturally invites you to do. It can offer a very beautiful result as well, but it's definitely not what is written. Music is a language. One of the things I realized after dealing with this topic is that the same way we learn a language better from a native speaker In the same way, a modern performer could learn to play the modern piano better by learning the fortepiano dialect. Like an interpreter who translates poems from one language to another, he or she has to know both languages very well, and by all means, offer the best rendering of it. As a modern pianist, playing on historic instruments was an experience that revealed information to me, which I think I wouldn't have gained otherwise, so I feel very lucky about that. Of course, the more I got involved with the instruments, the more I wanted to study the music history itself through treatises and books, which offer plenty of information in regard to the performance practice of the music of those times. This video is about the experience I had the last 2 years researching this topic, but it also serves the purpose of informing and inviting others to look further into it. I believe that there are a lot of things to be discovered in regards to the interpretation of this music, and I hope that this video will give information and a bit of inspiration to those who look for it.